Everyone, and for all of those who celebrate, I hope you had a happy 4th. I was in Door County, Wisconsin myself. It was a great week of rest. I didn't crack open my laptop once, so counting that as a win. Last time, 2 weeks ago, I had the intention of doing a live stream about how to build a personal GPT. Unfortunately, the live stream got interrupted about a minute into it. So that event was still recorded. It just didn't happen live. You can find it on the event on LinkedIn, or you could go to my YouTube to find that. But basically, we did a step-by-step walkthrough on how to build a personal GPT. And specifically, I shared how to create your own style guide editor that you could use for your team, or at least a rudimentary version of that. So today we are going to do a content UX audit. And just as a reminder, you can use that URL at the bottom of the screen, that blogsmith.tips/content UX, to submit your content for a future rendition of these. It just asks a couple very quick questions about the URL you want me to look at, any sort of notes and things like that. And the end result will be something like what you'll see here today. So I guess we'll go ahead and jump into what we're talking about today. This will be the content that I will be auditing. So it's from Todoist, and I picked Todoist for a couple of reasons. The first being that it's a tool that I use and love for many years now. Initially, I used it as one of my first project management tools working with a team when I started to scale up my business from Maddie Osmond freelance writer to the Blogsmith content agency. This was like the very first tool I used to collaborate with other people. And quite honestly, it worked great for a very long time when my needs were simpler. Nowadays, I have a very complex workflow, custom fields, different user permissions and things like that just made it so that Todoist is unfortunately no longer a fit for that purpose. Although my husband and I still use it for groceries and trip planning and different shared tasks like that. So very, very great tool, and really quite a robust content program. Their content, whenever I get their emails, I immediately jump over to see, whatever the newest blog post is, because I think it's just so like aesthetically pleasing, but it's also really good information. And so today is a little bit, I guess, of like a love letter to Todoist. I will have, some critical things, just really ideas. They're not even necessarily things that, I think they have to change, but let's go ahead and jump into this article and kind of comment on really like what's working well and what ideas could be interesting to try. So just making sure everything's working. I'm also going to just do a really quick check to make sure that this is streaming. I believe it is, but I like to refresh the event page on LinkedIn to make sure. And yes, indeed, it looks like it's working. Cool. Okay. So I picked this piece because it kind of falls in line with trends that I'm noticing for content in light of Google's helpful content updates. And we're really noticing the difference that adding that like EEAT factor can bring, weaving in expertise and authoritativeness. And I think that Todoist does this both in terms of just like the writing team that they have themselves. And I'm actually, as I'm talking, looking to see if there is an author bio on here. But also, and there isn't, and so I do want to comment on that, but also in that they mention having advice from, people external to Todoist on this article that we'll also talk about and explore, But yeah, just to say that I think the future of ranking and search, which of course is a very hard to predict future at this point, but I think it does come down to that unique human expertise, authoritativeness, perspective, just in general. And so this article, that's one of the reasons why I picked this one, because it's doing a good job of that. I think, just the topic itself is interesting, especially to somebody who uses productivity tools. It seems like a good match for anybody who's using these productivity tools within a team, such as how I did in the past. It mentions some specific categories and related things, but let's go back to that idea of the author bio. So One thing that I think comes in tandem with this like EEAT, Google Helpful Content Update perspective and resulting algorithm shifts for really those who are not taking heed of the specific guidelines that they share with us, is that Google and really like the human readers that it represents that are using search, they want to understand the context of like where this information is coming from and the writer and whether or not that writer like has authority to speak on this topic. And so not having a byline here, a stated author, and then like a bio that explains their relevant credentials is definitely doing them a disservice, and it's something that could potentially hurt ranking in line with the helpful content updates moving forward. On that note, and this seems to be coming up a lot recently with just like different client things and audits and, you know, just like adjusting to the latest algorithm updates. I don't know if I could say this is specifically about the helpful content update, but just this idea of content freshness. Certainly, you know, having like a regular publishing cadence, but also going back to articles you've written in the past and making sure that those are up to date. And really knowing like, when did this article actually publish? I could go back to the bottom, but I don't believe that I saw a date there. So it would be useful. And like something like this, a productivity topic, is maybe not a super timely thing. Although the fact that they included this advice from 11 leaders like might be timely because, you know, I want to know like when these people were leaders, like is that advice that I should trust like at this point in their careers if I were to dive in deep, right? But in general, having a published date helps people understand, again, the context, really ultimately the freshness of this article. And so I think this is something that could hurt Todoist, not having the bio, not having the date. I'm sure they have their reasons for it, but I just want to point that out for anybody watching this. So going through the article, we immediately have a nice call to action. It's very understated, so I do wonder about that, although it is like sort of taking up this sidebar space and nothing else is, and it scrolls with you, so that's great. Again, I'm sure Todoist has done like plenty of their own testing in terms of like what's effective, you know, what colors to use, what language to use. I also find it interesting that the call to action doesn't have maybe some sort of like punctuation, or like sometimes what I'll do is add kind of like a directional cue, like, you know, these little arrows or something like that. So that's just something that strikes me, but again, they probably have their reasons and it's probably doing a pretty good job. But just some things that I notice. Another thing that I noticed that I really like is this progress bar as you scroll through this article. And I guess it's also worth mentioning that I'm not totally sure if this like inspiration is their main blog or if there is yet another blog, but this one is particularly about like productivity best practices. And so in that sense, it may be less timely, but again, from the ranking perspective, they still might need some dates on here. But yeah, very simple. Again, the Todoist aesthetic is something to envy, I think, because it's so beautiful. It's so simple. It's very minimalistic. It gets to the point and it focuses on the most important things. Like you also notice there's a subscribe button up here. So, you know, pretty like, you know, straightforward calls to action and not really competing. So yeah, so we have this progress bar. One thing that I always question is like, do emojis belong in blog content? And this is like such a personal preference, but sometimes it takes me out of it a little bit, especially with Todoist, who I kind of think about being, you know, that like professional brand, you know, speaking to kind of more of like a formal-ish audience. And I'm just like making stuff up here because I don't know, I haven't analyzed their voice or anything like that, and I'm not going to do that today. But it's just something that I noticed that I always question when I'm writing blog content or when I'm approving blog content that writers at the Blogsmith create. I'm like, does this belong here? Does it take me out of it? So, one other thing that I'll mention that would be a nice to have, but again, Todoist probably has their reasons, is it would be really cool to have some sort of table of contents. This is definitely a personal preference for me. It's something that we talk about in the Blogsmith style guide. But it's nice to have kind of like a flight plan of like, where are we going from here? What is the full context of this article? Is there somewhere that I would like to jump? And you might think, depending on how deep into content marketing you are, it's like, of course I want to try to get somebody to read this whole article because I've worked so hard on it. There's a lot of, interesting tidbits here. But at the end of the day, I think it serves us best as marketers who have goals for our content to assist the reader in finding the information that is most relevant to them right now. And then if they really like it, it creates a positive brand impression. They might bookmark the article and come back to it later. They might share it with a friend who's going to consume a different part. So having a table of contents in some ways can feel a little counterintuitive to like getting people to scroll and interact and things like that, but it's very intuitive for the goal of creating that positive brand impression and being truly helpful, which is what Google wants us to do. So that would be something I would consider, and maybe it could live under the call to action. Maybe there's some, margin or padding that kind of spaces it out, but still creates this usefulness and doesn't really like take up any extra space. It could also live where we usually put it is like at the end of the intro before you get into the first subheading. So that's just a thought. It's interesting that this person is writing from the first person perspective, that me, that I, because they haven't identified themselves as I've previously mentioned. So that's just something of interest here. I love the spacing throughout. I think they do a really good job with formatting, selective bolding within the list items. That's something that we would do at the Blogsmith too. And I think like an emoji like this actually fits well. It's more of like the smiley emojis that I think I have a problem with. So now we're starting to get into some of the experts that they've interviewed for this article, and we have the name, we have the title, we have the job they come from, and then we have some quotes and some insights and things like that. One thing that I noticed when going through this article is I would love to see a little bit more variation with the visuals. The visuals are gorgeous. Like that goes without saying. I mean, starting with the featured image itself, they're all consistent with Todoist style. They're all compelling to me. They're basic, and I'm using that word just in terms of like they're not cluttered and overcrowded with text or with imagery. It's usually like kind of like this hand-drawn illustration style that's like, an aspect of the topic that again is just it falls in line with the rest of their branding, and in that regards it's very compelling. But looking through some of the examples throughout the articles, one thing that I notice is that they're very wordy, and this kind of goes with Todoist in general. You're creating a list. It usually involves words or other characters and things like that. But I just want you to kind of notice as I scroll through that most of their examples are, like screenshots of using Todoist, for example, or their principles of productivity, specifically delegation, per this article. But just notice how, like, every single one of them has some kind of wordiness to it. Even this, there's blank space, but there's words. Words. Words aren't bad. Words help us understand. This one's more simplistic, and it kind of, like, cuts out, some of the wordiness so that you can focus on the visual. Same with this, just that it's not super wordy, but, it still incorporates, obviously, text. And so my thought going through was it would be really great to see maybe a little bit more variation of the visuals, just because it is a long article. It's a good article. It has a lot of useful insights, and it has a lot of useful visuals. But just for that reader's eye to kind of break up, create a little bit more white space, make it easier to scroll, and give just that visual break for the eyes. One thing they could do that's going to defeat the purpose of what I just said is going back to those subject matter experts. So for example, here we have again the name, the role where this person works, and a quote. One thing we really like to do is create visuals of these quotes, and perhaps what they could do too, maybe this doesn't make sense, if they had some sort of visual that featured the experts, like maybe they even have, I don't know, something at the top that just is kind of like an image that shows all their headshots or something. I don't know if I love that. I'm just talking out loud. But anyway, if they were to create some visuals that feature those quotes and the headshots and the details. It wouldn't really help with the wordiness thing. But I do think it would do a better job of showcasing the experts, because as I scroll, I do kind of have to pay attention to where those experts are showing up, like in the text. I have to kind of look for them specifically. But if I had that visual, the fact that they went to the work to get all these like great leaders and their advice, you could showcase it a little better with something on brand, quote imagery, and then it also doubles as like a beautiful piece that those experts can then use to share on their own social networks with their own, connections and things like that. So that doesn't really solve the problem of what I brought up. But what I was going to say is the visuals could perhaps be split up with, purposefully using some visuals without words. It could be illustrations such as this one, variations of it that fit, to help explain the topics in a visual way. Could potentially be some like GIFs or something, like an illustration GIF. But yeah, and again, this is probably a problem that, not that it's unique to Todoist, but their tool is built around the idea of lists and words and characters. So something I think for them to keep in mind, to just think about, well, how can we break up a big article visually in a way that gives some rest while encouraging people to keep scrolling. So with that being said, I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add. Again, I think this is an incredible article. I think that, there are some things to consider that they probably already have considered, but just sharing for your benefit here. Another thing to maybe consider, or just to think about for all of us, right, is where the formatting breaks. So this probably should be on one line, because this one is, well, it's technically on two lines, like the text wraps, but it's like wrapping in a strange way here. So that's something that takes away, I think, from this like beautiful, professional, like highly authoritative piece that they've put together. And it's, ultimately, I'm sure, an accident. Same with this. And you almost start to wonder, like, which one is the style that they wanted to go for, because then it goes back here. So not totally sure. One other thing too, I'm just thinking about different ways that they could break up this text, because it is text heavy. It's all good text, but it kind of needs some variation. Something like this, like, remember this, or like hot tip, or, don't forget, or whatever. It would be nice to create a different text treatment. Maybe something like this, where it's like a highlight, like background color, or like a nice box or something like that. Maybe the quotes could even have a little bit more styling. So that would visually break up things in a way that I think creates like less eye strain, or whatever I'm trying to get at there. Let's see if there's anything else that stands out to me. I mean, I love, like explaining the concepts visually. I'm a big business book person, so it always helps me when I'm reading a business book to understand, like, not just the context of what they're talking about, but then when they put it in a real life example. And I think something like this gets close to that. It's obviously not a specific example, but it's helping you like parse the information a different way than just the text alone. And that's why I think visuals are so important in blog content. That's a big part of why we offer custom visuals with every piece of content we create, because it is so important to adjust. And I just realized I was way zoomed in, so hopefully that hasn't been for a long time. Let me see if I can fix this real quick here. What was I gonna say? People learn all sorts of different ways, and the visuals within your content can support that. And that's why I'm also saying, like, maybe consider some different visuals that are less text heavy. Also, I realize that it's kind of, it's not everybody's preference to read business books, but articles are a nice way to get knowledge quickly on a very focused subject, and so they can certainly borrow some of those principles. I think that's really most of what I wanted to say. It's useful that they also give kind of like tools that you could use here too. And I think that that's very characteristic of Todoist as a brand. And a lot of like productivity tools, I think, do this too, where they create a lot of templates and, just like usable things that you could plug into their tool, or you could otherwise, use in like Google Sheets if it's like supplementary to what their tool would do. That's always super useful when you can not only describe a concept, but you can give people something to execute on it. And it doesn't have to be something that you pour a lot of design resources into. It can be like working with these experts, for example, like maybe they already have something that you could repurpose, and you might have to take a lot of details out or something like that, especially if it's like really proprietary and, is something that's really critical to their business functions. But your writer or the subject matter experts that you interview might have some really great tools if you just ask, or that you could create based on the knowledge that you've gathered from creating the piece in the first place. So, yeah, I mean, probably be good to have another call to action before you scroll. Again, I'm sure they've tested this thoroughly. I'm just mentioning it, that it kind of ends abruptly. What we do at the Blogsmith is whenever we have a conclusion, we do final thoughts, semicolon, probably the article's title or something very similar to that. And then we usually have some sort of call to action at the end, just depending on the goal of the article. I'm not saying that that's the right or the wrong way, but it does have a sense of closure, I think, and that's what I'm kind of missing here. Again, based on like what I'm used to. So that's nice too that they have suggested articles so that you can keep reading. I will say, and I'm just as guilty of this, ideally you want to optimize your text for like any sort of, like whether it's your regular blog roll, like parent page, or it's like these suggested articles, you want to try to optimize it so it doesn't cut off. And it might mean just like understanding what the character count is. And usually depending on your CMS, there's something that you can fit in as like the meta description text that you can then use as like the excerpt text. Okay. I think that's all I have for you today. Once again, let me go back to this main screen here. If you would like me to audit your content, please use this link down here, this blogsmith.tips/content UX. I hope you enjoyed what we discussed today, and I hope it gave you some food for thought for your own content. And we will see you in 2 weeks. My next topic is going to be about, is AI generated content plagiarism? And you can bet I have a bunch of opinions about that. So the event is live. You can sign up for that on LinkedIn, or otherwise wherever you're viewing this, it's also been posted there. So I will see you then. Thank you so much for joining me today.